Hello dear viewers, here is Danny. I am so happy having finished my largest project on YouTube so far at least. I hope that you will enjoy not only watching this content but actually fixing and maintaining your bikes. So, in the description and in the pinned comment you've got all the links that will help you navigate through different parts of this material. If you find it helpful, please share it with your friends. I'll be very grateful for that. So, it's time to grasp our tools and let's hit it! We'll start maintaining our bike from the frame because this is the soul of our bike. We attach anything else to the frame, like the components, the wheels, the seat post and our handlebars. So we can replace the wheels, we can replace the groups that we are using, but the frame will stay with us and this is the soul of the bike. That's why it is really important to take good care of this chassis of our whole machine. So we'll start the inspection by looking at any damages of the frame. Great opportunity to check and inspect the frame is the bike wash. So while we are washing the bike, always looking for some new scratches or imperfections on the paint. We can find some places which could be damaged. One of the areas of our frame which we should inspect regularly is the head tube, or now on the modern bikes, this huge head box, because it transfers a lot of forces from the fork, from the wheel, from the fork to the other parts like the top tube and the main tube of the frame. One place where a crack may occur, for example, is right here, the bottom surface of the head tube. So look for any damages there. If you react pretty quickly to some small cracks, if this is the carbon bike, you sometimes may be able to repair the frame, which would be awesome, instead of simply buying a new one. Another thing that we should take care of is the housing rubbing against the frame. As you can see on many bikes, like on this one, the housing will not actually touch the frame, so that we don't have to put any additional protection just to protect the paint of the frame. But as you will see in the second, there was some one place on the fork which I did have to protect. The next area we want to inspect is the top tube, especially where the handlebar can touch it or can actually damage it. On my bike there is the shifter that touches the top tube, not the handlebar, but especially when we crash, which really happens quite often for us, the handlebar can damage the top tube, so inspect this area regularly. Here's the next area, that's the joint between the top tube and the seat tube, because in the seat tube we have our seat post. On the seat post there is our saddle, and sometimes we just jump on the bike with the whole weight of our body. Sometimes we go through some bumps into terrain sitting on the saddle, and some cracks may occur right here. So on the carbon frame, just inspect the whole area. On the alloy or steel frame, you should inspect especially all the welds. Here's the next area we should inspect. That's the area of the chain rings on our crankset. It happens to us especially in the muddy terrain somewhere on the trails, even on the new drivetrains, that we have our chain dropped between the chain ring and the frame, or it will be sucked in between right here. Then some serious damage can occur. Make sure there is no damages here, and also make sure that there is some really good protection on the surface of this area on the frame. Even if it's an alloy, it's not only for carbon, alloy frames, steel even frames, it's good to have this kind of protection here. What areas of the frame should we protect? I would say protect anything that will have any contact with the housings or with the chain of your bike. So the chain stays on the drive side, that's for sure. The only place or area where I found some rubbing, the housing rubbing against the bike, was the fork. That's the crown here, and that's some area on the left side of the fork. I just use some regular tape for this, which is not specifically designed for it. If you buy some special protection for the frame, it will be thicker, it will last longer, but also at the edges of those thicker stickers there may be some dirt, just looking not very nice. So I'm using just the thin one, and I'm replacing it regularly. These are the bolts that assemble the bottle cage to the frame. We also have such a small bolts assembling, for example, fender and racks, and also the derailleur hanger to the frame. And these are not the ones we would use very often. That's why at least once in a year I would just check those out, clean the threads, put some grease, and make sure those will be just fastened as they should be, so that we don't lose it, and we also don't damage them when we try to unthread the bolt, which has been there for years and it's really rusty. Some multi-purpose grease will be just fine for that reason. We just put a little bit of the grease on the clean thread of the bolts and then we can thread those in. The other thing we should remember about is not to over tighten those bolts. Normally you should have those info on the manual of your bike, but these little bolts, like for the bottle cage, should need just about 2 or 3 Newton meters of your force. So if you do not use the torque wrench, I would hold the Allen key by the shorter arm, and then you can be sure you're not gonna use too much force while threading those in. After some months or years of using your bike, you can find out that you're just about to lose some of those bolts, so make sure you pay attention to those at least once a year. If these 2 little bolts that will assemble the derailleur hanger to the frame are loosened, the hanger can move around a little bit, and also the shifting performance will be not as good as it should be. If you don't clean and grease your bolts from time to time, maybe once a year, you can cause a very serious problem like this one here. The thread on the frame is loosened because this bolt was rusty, and somebody had to use a lot of force in order to unthread the bolt, and so the thread in the frame wasn't able to withstand that force, and it's loosened now. So now we have to fix the frame. Another important area of our frame is the seat post clamp. If the seat post clamp will not be fastened strong enough, well enough, the saddle will be just slipping down during our ride. If we over tighten this bolt, we can damage the frame or the seat post. It is a very good idea to check from time to time whether the bolt is pretty clean, and also clean the surface between the seat post clamp and the frame. If it was not the carbon frame, I would also use a little bit of a grease just in between the seat post clamp and the frame. It will make for the seat post clamp easier to fasten just around the frame. Now we should tighten the bolt. How do we do it? On almost each of those seat post clamp on your bikes, there will be some torque just written by the manufacturer. Here we have the maximum torque, 6.5 Newton meters. Since I've used some special paste just on the seat post that will increase the friction between the seat post and the frame, I can use some lower force. So I'm going to use, let's say, just below 6 Newton meters. I'm using a torque wrench for this reason. So let's just set just below 6 Newton meters. It's still pretty much, I would say. That's it, it's done. If you don't have a torque wrench, it is really good idea to go to your local store and ask them to do it for you. If you have to do it by hand, really try to feel well that you are not over tightening the bolt, which can be a difficult thing. 6 Newton meters, well, it's pretty much, I would say. But if you over tighten this, it can really cause some damage. If you use the torque wrench, remember about setting it just back to the 0 position so that you don't have to calibrate it. Some seat clamps have really smart design with the quick release. That means we can open our seat post somewhere on the trails if we want to go on some steep descents and lower our seat. That's possible without using any tools. In this case, we should remember the same things, having our screws clean and greased, having grease between the seat clamp and the frame. If it's not a carbon frame, we do not put the grease on a carbon frame. And also the surface where the lever is rubbing or pushing against the seat clamp, there should be some grease as well. It will make closing it and opening it much easier. Another thing we should remember about in this case is this little micro adjustment. If this bar adjustment, if you will, is opened too much, the quick release won't clamp our seat post just strong enough. So we should find the right spot for it. The rule of thumb is to set this bar adjuster so that we will start to feel some resistance on the lever 90 degrees before it's clamped and fastened. So that would be something. It's loose, now I feel the resistance, now it's fastened and this seat post won't go down. The headset, that's the part of our bike which joins the frame with the fork. The steering tube of the fork is here inside the head tube. This part, which just stands out, allows us to assemble the stem and the handlebar to it so that we can turn the bars. It doesn't matter whether you have the modern bike with fully integrated bearings or the older type, the basic rule is the same. We have two bearings, the upper one and the one at the bottom, and those two bearings allow us to handle the bike. We've got three bolts here. These two bolts assemble the stem to the steering tube. Some stems will have just one bolt, and the third one here compresses the whole system, compresses the bearings, and allows us to get rid of any play in the headset. Now we're gonna unthread these two and then the third one. brake the front brake, rock the bike back and forth and see whether there is some play or not. But just make sure you are first fastening this bolt here, and then when there is enough preload on the bearings and still the bearings are working really smooth, we are fastening the stem on the steering tube. The fork inspection will be pretty much the same as with the frame. We want to look for any cracks, damages, or the surface of the fork being rubbed by the housings. This one is pretty okay. There is lots of scratches. This is an old one, but it looks good. Dropouts, especially if we have carbon dropouts and we buy a used bike, make sure that somebody, the previous owner, did not squeeze those too much, because then they can just be damaged. There can be some cracks, so always look for the cracks on especially carbon dropouts. The front suspension fork makes our ride fun and safe, and even though you are probably not a professional mechanic, you don't have to take your fork apart. The thing that you can really do for your fork is to keep the good stuff inside and the bad stuff outside, and that means cleaning your fork. This is the part of our fork that we all can and should be taking care of. That's the dust seal. The dust seal, that's something we can see from the outside. There are also some seals inside the fork, inside those outer legs. We should keep this area clean. While we are cleaning the bike, washing the bike, we should always take a closer look at this part. We don't want to have here any sand, any grime or anything. But I would also clean this part more often than I wash the bike, and I use just a cloth with a little bit of a water on it, and such a tool, which is super helpful here. I'm trying to keep my brush clean by just rubbing it against the cloth, the rack, and then cleaning my seal. The next step we want to do is to use some kind of a lubricant, but not just some kind of a lubricant. We don't want to spray on the upper legs and on our seal any stuff, any spray that would damage the rubber. So it has to be rubber friendly. This Brunox Dio that I'm using is really good. It will really prolong the lifetime of your seals, and it will also make your fork working smoother. So what we're gonna do is to put just a little bit on the upper leg here. Now we take our bike off the bike stand, because we want to spread our lubricant all over the seal and the upper legs, simply by working the fork. And then the last step will be simply using some dry cloth in order to clean everything. I would sometimes let it stay like that overnight and then clean the whole thing the next morning. This is the disc brake. It is powerful, pretty good in terms of the modulation, and this type of the brake is becoming more and more popular, not only on the mountain bikes but also on the road bikes. So let's see how to maintain and adjust these. The first thing we can adjust on our disc brakes according to our preferences is the position of the lever, meaning how far the lever will be from the handlebar. In the starting position, people with smaller hands would like to have it closer, with larger or longer fingers would like to have it further away from the bars. Most of the manufacturers will give us this option. Here on my SRAM level brakes, I have this small 2mm Allen key or the bolt there. When I'm threading it in, as you can see, the distance between the lever and the handlebar increases. That means if I have larger hands, it will suit me better. I'd like to have it really in the furthest possible position. This fits me well. So you should be searching for some small bolts, adjustment bolts, somewhere on your braking lever. One of the main problems that a disc brake user can come across is this. It is the disc rotor rubbing against the braking pads. It is not only annoying because it makes some noise, but also it will wear down our disc brake rotor and the braking pads faster, and solution of this problem is pretty easy. These two bolts assemble our caliper brake to the fork, so we want to unthread these just a little bit. We don't want to have this caliper completely loose, just having the chance to move it around a little bit is enough. This is just enough. What we do next is that we squeeze the braking lever. Now the pads are squeezing against the disc brake rotor, and the caliper brake is being centered. And now we thread those in, fastening the whole caliper brake to the fork. Let's see how it worked. It worked very well. The problem is solved. This method works pretty well, but if you are going to adjust your rear caliper brake, it may be difficult for yourself if you're just alone to squeeze the braking lever and also to reach to the caliper to the rear. So adjusting this just manually can be a good thing. White piece of paper can help you to see exactly what's the position of the disc brake rotor against the braking pads, and also using a flashlight, just like bicycle light, you can see exactly what's happening in between the disc brake rotor and disc brake pads. Remember also to spin the wheel, because the rotor is almost never perfectly true, so it will just move a bit, and when you adjust it by hand manually, it may help you to find the right spot. There are also two other reasons for the disc brake rotor rubbing against our braking pads. It's the rotor being out of true, and if it's really out of true, we won't be able to adjust the caliper so that it won't be rubbing at all. Then we just need to true the rotor, and that's we're gonna do in a second. And the second reason for this rubbing is also our quick release, or the through axle. We should try to squeeze the whole system with the same force each time we remove the wheel and put it back together. So if we have a quick release, we should know how many turns we use in order to remove the wheel on the nut, and then when we put the wheel back together, we just count the same number of turns on the nut. And if it's a through axle, we want to have this lever always in the same position when the wheel is fastened. Then we have same force, squeezing the whole system, and no rubbing. These are the braking pads for our bicycle. When you buy one, you should find the right type that will fit the model of your brakes, and also the right compound that will fit your riding style and the weather conditions that you are going to be riding in. As you will see, replacing the braking pads, it's pretty easy job for different models, and pretty similar for different models. And we replace these when this compound, not the plate itself, but the compound on the plate, is getting thinner than around 1.5 millimeter. Before we replace our pads, it's really good idea to remove the wheel. Replacing the braking pads is pretty easy job. You can find some pins on, for example, Shimano calipers, or some bolts on this SRAM level, for example. Also my Magura brakes would have the bolt. Here there is some additional protection that I have to remove first. It looks just like this, and then I can unthread the bolt and now remove the braking pads. This is how my braking pads look like. These are still thicker than 1.5 millimeters, so they can stay here. Before we do that, this is very good opportunity to clean and degrease our caliper. And one very important thing, we should never squeeze the braking lever when the braking pads are removed, or the braking pads are there but the wheel is removed, because we can cause some oil leak and really severe problems. So never pull the braking lever when there is nothing in between the braking pads or no braking pads. Now It can be caused by overheating, so when we really abuse our bicycle on the descents, long descents, and we overheat the disc brake rotor, it can get a bit out of true. The second reason is not using these mounting bolts properly. These should be fastened with the even force, and also while you are assembling the disc brake rotor to your hub, don't just fasten those in a row, but like every other bolt, so that all the forces working on the disc brake rotor will be even, and then the rotor will be really true. The third reason is just the mechanical. If you just lean the bike against itself during the transportation, it is pretty easy to damage our disc brake rotor, so make sure you avoid that. Truing our disc brake rotor isn't really complicated, but it's a very good idea to purchase a special tool for that. It will make our job so much easier. First off, we need to find the place where the rotor gets out of true, and once we find it, we can use the paper or the bicycle light as we showed you. Once we find the place, we will try to true it. Now, how not to do it? I would not use the tool just like this right here, because I will just mess up with the surface of my rotor. I would rather use it with the arms or like that. So holding by the arms of my rotor, it will be much better for the whole shape of the whole thing. You can also do it somewhere on the trails when something happens, crash or anything occurs, and you want to just get home or to the finish line. You can push it with your fingers or pull it outwards. Just make sure you try not to touch the braking surface with your fingers, because then you would have to degrease it, which will not be possible somewhere on the trail. These are the V-brakes, very simple, efficient and good brakes. Let's talk now a bit about when to replace, how to replace, and maybe when to clean our braking pads. First off, the basic rule here is very simple. We want to brake with the compound, not with the metal part of our braking pads, so that's simple. On many pads you're gonna have some wear limit indicator. If you've got one, it will be very easy, but you can also simply look at the braking pads. For example, this one has a lot of rubber and we don't have to replace it, but if you take a closer look at the pad, you're gonna see some particles in it. Some pieces of sand, some dirt, some metal parts, and all these will wear down our rim pretty quickly. So we want to have our braking pads pretty clean. That's why I'm using a special file from Topic, but you can just use any type of a file which will not wrap too much of a rubber. You just want to take off all this dirt. Of course, we are wearing down the braking pad by doing it, but we will prolong the lifetime of our wheels a lot. Now the braking pad looks much better. There is no particles in it. It will also brake better and you will not hear that metallic sound while braking. Replacing the pads is very easy. If you have a cartridge like I do, you've got here some kind of a pin. I'm just pushing it from the bottom first, and then I can pull it off with my pliers, and now it's very easy. Simply slide it to the back, and then we can put a new one and put the pin back. If you don't have a cartridge system, I recommend that you buy one, because then we are only replacing the compound and it takes very little time and you don't have to readjust the brakes. If you don't have a cartridge system, you just have to replace the whole thing, which is also easy, but you're gonna have to readjust your brakes. Now, very important thing here is when you are removing the braking pads, just pay attention to all the spacers which can fall to the floor, because we need to put those in the same order. If we don't do it correctly, we're not going to be able to adjust the brakes as they should be aligned. So remember to pay attention to all these spacers and then put the new braking pad and make the whole job with the alignment just as shown in the video. And now we will learn in just a few steps how to adjust our V-brakes so that they will be pretty powerful. First off, let's just see what kind of adjustments we've got. The first adjustment we've got, and many people would really not notice it, is the length of the housing. By manipulating with the length of the housing, we can make our V-brakes working smoother, and also we can avoid spongy brakes. First thing that I'm noticing here is that this part of the cable is being pushed upwards. Can you see that? We want to have a really straight line between those two arms of the V-brakes. That means this housing is too long and it pushes this aluminum part or steel part upwards, just like that, so that we are getting just a little bit of a sponginess right here. Can you see how the whole housing is moving? So we need to cut this a little bit. And we're gonna do some cutting later. Now let's just move on to different adjustments of those V-brakes. One of the basic adjustments we can do on our brakes is the cable tension. And for that we can use the barrel adjuster. So I'm unthreading it right now. And as you can see, those braking pads come closer to the rim. When I'm threading it back, I'm getting more distance between the braking pads and the braking surface, which is the rim. Of course, if we want to make some larger changes on the cable tension, we use this mounting bolt, which is fastening the cable, braking cable. Now we can either make this gap between braking pads and the rim larger or smaller. And then we use the barrel adjuster for the micro adjustments. In order to center the position of our brakes against the rim, we're gonna use these little screws. But first off, we wanna make sure that our wheel is in line with the frame or with the fork. And now we can proceed to the adjustment. These little screws will regulate the tension on these springs. So if I'm unthreading this one, I am decreasing the tension of the spring. As you can see, the opposite arm is just pulling the whole brake towards the left side. And now when I'm increasing the tension of the spring, I'm just pulling the brake to my side, to the side of the brake, which will have more tension on the spring. Of course, we want to have those brakes centered, so the distance between the braking pads and the rim should be even on both sides. I'm always trying to have the minimal possible tension that will make my brake working smooth, because as we increase the tension on both sides, we'll still have balance between left and right side, but we'll feel more resistance while braking. So minimum tension here, that will allow for the brake to work smoothly. Now we can start adjusting our braking pads. It's pretty easy. What we want to have here is the whole surface of a pad touching against the rim. That means not being too low, not too high, because then the braking pad would rub against the tire and damage it. And we want to see those braking pads being weighed down evenly on this side, and also left and right. This is why we want to look at our braking pads at this level and set it at this level, just like this. And we also want to pay attention at this position of each of those braking pads. This bolt is fastening our braking pads. In this case, this is a 5mm Allen key. When unthreading this one, we now have access to a whole adjustment, so we can move those up, down, and in different directions. So we're gonna use this one bolt in order to adjust the braking pad. Both braking pads are loose now, so that we can proceed with the adjustment. Some bike mechanics would recommend not adjusting those exactly parallel to the rim, but having slightly more distance in the rear than in the front. I'm just exaggerating it right now. It probably helps with the squeaking noise, and also some say that the brakes are flexing while we brake, so it will help with the even wear on the compound when it's set like that and not parallel. If you want to use this method, which I'm not a great fan of, you can also take some piece of a rubber, put it at the back of the braking pad on both sides, so that you will have the same exact distance on both sides, and now you can proceed with the alignment. I'm not doing it with any of my bike, and also my observation is that on this bike somebody did use this method, and you can see there is more compound at the back of the braking pad than in the front, because somebody did set it like this. So I'm not using this method. My method is much more simple. I don't have problems with the squeaking noise, and the compound on those pads is being weighed down very evenly. This is how I do it. Operating with these pads, having just two hands isn't that easy, because we want to hold to the braking pad with one hand. The other one we're gonna use for fastening, and also the third one would be really helpful for braking. So this is what I do. Instead of using one of my hands for braking, I'm simply using the barrel adjuster. So now my braking pads will just brake, and it will be extremely easy to align those and fasten the bolts. Now I have my both hands available, so I'm focusing now on aligning the braking pads. So not too high, not too low, the right angle, and 100% parallel to the rim. This is going to be very good. When you have your tire on the rim, that's even better, because then you will see whether it touches or will rub against the tire or not. but this should be just fine. The braking pad is exactly in the middle of the braking surface on the rim, and so now I can fasten the bolt holding to my braking pad, and the job will be done once I do it on both sides. After threading the barrel adjuster back to its position and releasing the cable, we can see how the brake is working. This is nearly perfect. You can see that these braking pads weren't being used evenly on this side and this side, and also here back at the back and the front. That's because that system of alignment, in my opinion, the parallel alignment is just better and it works perfect. There will be no squeaking noises. If you've noticed that these V-brakes have the parallel system that makes those braking pads work and move just parallel to the rim, don't worry, you're gonna be adjusting your brakes on the standard normal V-brakes just in the same manner. So this is almost perfect. Adjusting the caliper brakes on a road bike isn't that much different from what we've done with the V-brakes. In this case, we also want to have our wheel being centrally located between those two braking pads. As you can see on this bike, one of these pads is already touching the rim and the other one has still 3 or 4 millimeters of a distance. That means we have to readjust the position of a whole caliper brake. In order to readjust the position of the whole caliper against the wheel, we need to unthread this bolt, which is fastening our brake to the frame or to the fork if it's a front brake. And now I can feel we can proceed to the readjustment. Now we can move the caliper brake, finding the perfect position of our braking pads against the rim on both sides. And once it's centered, I'm fastening the bolt here. After fastening just a little bit, I'm gonna check whether the braking pads are working perfectly. Yeah, this is exactly same distance on both sides between the braking pad and the rim on the left and the right side. So now I can fasten it, holding to my caliper brake, making sure it will not move. Now it's working perfectly. Our caliper brake is now set correctly and fastened so that we can proceed with the adjustment on our braking pads. In order to do that, we need to find the bolt which is fastening the braking pad to the caliper brake. That's the one here. It looks exactly the same as on the V-brakes. After releasing it, I can now move the braking pad around. Once more, some bike mechanics would like to set larger distance between the braking pad and the rim at the back of the pad comparing to the front. I don't do it. I would always set the braking pad exactly parallel to the rim. That seems to work very good for me on all the brakes I've been using so far. There have been many. In order to set the right position of the braking pad, you can use one hand in order to squeeze the whole brake, and now you can just move this braking pad around, and after you find the right position, you just fasten the bolt. But there is another way to do it, easier one, which I'm using almost always. Just as I did that with the V-brakes, I'm using the barrel adjuster to make my both braking pads touch the rim, just as it would be during the braking, and then setting the position of those braking pads will be very easy. After unthreading my barrel adjuster, I can see both of my braking pads touching the rim, which makes the whole adjustment so much easier. Now, I don't want my braking pad to be too low or too high. It should not rub against the tire, obviously. And I want to see the whole surface of the braking pad touching the braking surface of the rim. This position seems to be perfect. And now, holding to my braking pad with one hand, I will gently and slowly fasten this bolt, making sure that the braking pad is not moving while I'm threading it in. After adjusting the braking pads on both sides, I will now thread the barrel adjuster back in, releasing the cable. Now the brakes are ready for some high speed. During the wheel inspection, we want to take a closer look at the rim, meaning is the rim true? What is the tension of different spokes? Is it very even, or some spokes are pretty loose and other very tight? How does the braking surface look like if we don't have the disc brakes? And finally, what's the condition of the bearings in the hub? Let's look into the details now. Let's start with the braking surface. We can try to feel under our fingers how does the braking surface look like. Is it being wear down evenly on both sides, and also whether it doesn't have some larger holes. I do like to use the caliper for this reason. I'm not measuring anything here, and now I can see that the surface of my rim is very even, straight, so this rim is in very good condition. Let's see now whether the wheel is true. Having caliper brakes or V-brakes is very helpful here because we have here the reference point, but if you have the disc brakes, you can just use your palm and a thumb, just like this. As you can see, this wheel is in pretty good shape. There is just a slight movement from side to side, maybe about 1 millimeter or so. We can try to true this wheel, but this one is still in very good shape. We also want to look at the up and down movement of the rim. After spinning the wheel and looking at the rim, we also want to check the tension of the spokes. Of course, doing it by hand doesn't give you very exact measurement, but if you don't feel any very tight spokes and very loose spokes, that's good for the wheel. This one is very good. This is the example of a rim with a special wear indicator. This groove, which goes around a whole rim, will show us how much of the braking surface we've already taken off with our braking pads by braking. This one is still pretty deep. It shows that this rim doesn't have many miles on it. We need to replace the rim once this indicator will disappear completely. Now we can check out the bearings. First off, we want to hold the bike and rock the wheel from side to side, searching for any movement. There is no movement here, so there is no play on the bearings. Then we of course spin the wheel. We'll see how long it will spin. This one spins pretty long, so the bearings are clean at least. And also we want to listen for any type of noise coming from the bearings. It can be noise that comes from the dirt, being in between the balls in the bearings, or if the bearing is clean but dry, you will also hear some noise. This one, here, no noise, so very good condition of the bearings. Now, how to remove the wheel from our bike, from the fork or from the frame? First off, we need to consider what type of brakes we have. If we have a disc brakes, it's no problem. We can start by simply unthreading the bolts at the axle or just opening the quick release. But if we have V-brakes or any other type of caliper brakes which are braking on the rim, that means we need to open those so that the tire will be free to be removed. In order to remove the wheel from a road bike, we also need to open up the space between the braking pads and the rim. On most of the road bikes caliper brakes, we have some kind of a lever. This is the open position. Now the space is larger and the tire will go through, and now it's in the locked or closed position. Remember to close the brake after putting the wheel back on the bike. On the Campagnolo systems, we won't find such a lever on the caliper brakes, but we will find a special pin on the shifter. I'm pressing this one in, and now you will see that the braking lever will release more cable. That means the distance between the braking pads and the rim will be larger and will remove the wheel. After putting the wheel back on the bike, we are pushing this one back to its position. If our brake is already open, now we can remove the wheel. In case of having quick release, on one side we'll have a small lever, on the other side a nut. By opening the lever, we are loosening the wheel. On some bikes, on some forks, we will be already able to remove the wheel, especially in the front. As you can see here, we have additional protection. There's some groove so that we don't lose the wheel if the quick release is opened, so that we need to use the nut in order to remove the wheel. Maybe 1 or 2 turns and a half, and then the wheel is removed. Putting the wheel back on our machine means doing all the things in the opposite order. With one difference, I would recommend to have the bike put on the floor, so that the weight of the bike will center our wheel in the fork and in the rear in our frame. Now we are using the nut here in order to find the right resistance for our lever. How strong, how much force we need to use in order to lock the wheel securely and tightly. The rule of thumb is that we should start to feel resistance on the lever at about 90 degrees before it's locked. So this is the final position. Now I'm starting to feel the resistance somewhere here, which is pretty good. And now I'm locking it. I feel some resistance when locking it, so I'm sure it's secured. In order to fasten our wheel with the right and always the same amount of force, we should pay attention to the position of the lever. On my bike, it is always directed to the back of the bike and parallel to the ground. If you're not sure whether it's the right amount of torque, you should start feeling some resistance on the lever just about 90 degrees before it's fastened. So this is loosened right now, so I don't feel any resistance. I'm just begin to feel the resistance. Now I'm locking it and it's fastened very well. Doing it in this way, you won't have any problems with the disc brake pads rubbing against the rotor, because you will always have the same amount of force on your axle. And this is the second very similar type of the through axle. In this case, we don't have any lever which would open and close like a quick release. We simply unthread the through axle in order to remove the wheel and then thread it back in. So the whole procedure of removing the wheel or replacing the wheel is pretty much the same. We only need to find the right position for the lever and have it always the same before removing the wheel and after putting it back on the bicycle. If you do it for the first time, it may occur that your lever will be in some awkward position. That's why these systems will allow you to change the position of the lever. In this case, we need to pull the lever and then we can find the best position for it. On some other quick releases or through axles, we would need to push the lever and then change its position. Very easy. After removing the wheel from the bike, we are now removing also the valve cap, which is protecting the valve against any dirt, and then also the nut, which is securing the valve against the rim. Don't lose somewhere these two little things. In order to let the air out through the Presta valve, we need to unthread the additional protection here, and now the air is going out. Now we just need to remove the bead of the tire, at least from one side, out of the rim, so that we have the access to our inner tube. We do not use for this purpose a spoon or a metal screwdriver or any other object that could scratch the surface of the alloy rim or damage the carbon one, or even more so, it could cut through the tire or through the inner tube. So keep these away from your inner tube. The original tire levers are not so expensive and these help a lot, not threatening your inner tube. The longer one might be helpful if the tire is super tight around the rim and it's difficult to remove, but it doesn't happen so often. So normally I would use just two smaller levers. One side of the tire lever is shaped so that it will scoop up the bead of the tire, and the other one usually has some kind of a hook for the spokes, and it works like that. I am scooping up the bead of the tire, making sure I only catch the tire, not the inner tube which is there, because then I could also damage it. And now I'm using this hook and fastening my tire lever like that. Now I have both hands free, so that I can continue removing the bead just very gently. The tire is still pretty tight, so I'm just gonna do it for the third time. And now it will be very easy to remove the whole tire. It just goes like that. And the bead is off. You may have noticed that I started and finished opening the bead of the tire just around the valve area. And now, in order to remove the inner tube, I'm just beginning at the opposite side. It is very simple right now. If you wish, you can also remove the other bead of the tire in order to inspect the tire or the rim. Now I'm just pushing the valve back through and my inner tube can be replaced. Putting the tire with the inner tube back on the wheel is a fairly easy job, but we need to remember about a couple of things. Because if we do some mistakes, it can cost you as a flat tire or a very unbalanced ride. Here is the first step we want to make, and it's inflating our inner tube just a little bit so that it will get into its shape. Now, don't forget about the second step, which is deciding in what direction your tire or whole wheel should spin. Road bikes with the inner tube, that would be just around 7 bars. If you don't have the pump with the air pressure gauge, here's the test you can do to at least find out whether the air pressure on your bike isn't too low. Find yourself some kind of an obstacle, just like this one, and then push the wheel of your bike with the weight of your body against this obstacle. As you can see, if you can easily push it the whole way through, feeling that it's the edge of the rim that stops on the obstacle, the air pressure in this tire is too low for you. It will be very easy for you to get a pinch flat or even damage the tire, the inner tube or the rim. And it will look the same for the road bike. This is too low. Now we're going to clean and re-grease the angular bearings of the rear wheel, because we have to remember to start the whole process from the non-drive or the left side of the bike. Now we can see the nut here, but we need the access to both nuts, so the other one must be hidden under the seal. Just be careful with all kinds of seals and rubber parts of your bike. I'm trying to gently remove it from the axle, just like that. Now we have access to both nuts. Now we just need to find out what kind of wrench we're gonna use for both nuts. In this case, on this bike, the external one is the 17 millimeters and the internal one, the one here, is 15 millimeters. Now we know what to do. Now, very important principle: before removing anything from the bike, we need to make sure that we will remember the order of all the nuts and spacers and shims. So put those aside, just one by one, knowing in what order you will be putting them back. Of course, the hubs on your bikes can have different systems and different axles. For example, this one, Mavic Cross Max, will need the use of the Allen key on one side and a dedicated key on the other side. So make sure you check out what type of the hub you have before you try to remove anything, because you might need some special tools for it. You might also have the cartridge bearings on your hubs. How to go about these? You may remove those from the hub, but you will need a special tool for that. And then how to open those and service we are showing in the part about the headset. Now, some will say you should only replace these bearings, but I do service my cartridge bearings and their lifetime is like thousands or tens of thousands of kilometers. Truing the wheel. If we are not fully satisfied with the shape of our rim, I'm gonna give you some basic principles which will help most of you to fix the wheel. If you've got some deeper problem with the wheel which is bent, maybe it was hit, there is a link in the description to a whole tutorial about it. So let's see what are the basics. The wheel truing can be really enjoyable if you know these simple principles. The rim of the wheel is connected with the hub by the spokes. Now, some of the spokes, usually the half in their number, will go from the rim to the right flange of the hub, and some will go from the rim to the left flange of the hub. So this is pretty logic that the spokes from the left side will pull the rim to the left side, and the spokes from the right side will pull the rim to the right side. Now, in order to change the tension on different spokes, we need to use the nipples. Now we just need a special tool for the nipples. In order to true the wheel, we never use any kinds of pliers, because we can be almost sure that we will damage the nipples, and then the nipples should be replaced, which can be pretty costly on some fancy wheels. So this kind of tool should fit the type of the nipples we have on our wheels and also the size of it. Here we have different types and different sizes of the nipple tools. For example, here you can see the standard nipples in 4 different sizes, and this one is specifically designed for some of the Mavic wheels. You can also use, in addition to that, a tool for holding the spokes. If we have bladed arrow spokes in different sizes, you can use this one to hold it while you manipulate with the nipples. You can also buy such a kind of tool which has many different sizes. I would not maybe buy the cheapest ones, because those cannot be that accurate and can also damage the nipples, but something just in the mid-range of the price would be very good choice. Let's find the right tool for our nipples. This one doesn't fit. This one doesn't fit at all. We've got 2 left. This one, still not the best for the nipples. This one fits, and we're gonna use this one for wheel truing. We can finally move on to the truing. On the caliper brakes or the V brakes, we can use the barrel adjuster in order to decrease the distance between the braking pads and the rim, so that we will hear when the rim is moving in any direction. Let's try it. I'm unthreading the barrel adjuster. Okay, we start to hear it. That's it. The right one, the right braking pad, is rubbing against the rim, so the rim goes a little bit to the right. If your bike is spec'd with the disc brakes, you can simply use the zip ties by assembling those to the blades of the fork. One can indicate the side-to-side movement, and the other one, if you set it just above the edge of the rim, will indicate the up and down movement. Pretty clever. Alright, first off, we need to find out what part of the wheel we want to fix. Okay, the camera is set so that you can see this little distance between the braking pad and the rim, and you can see the wheel moving right here. No distance. Yeah, so that's where the rim is rubbing against the braking pad. That's exactly here, so that's the place we want to fix. Let's look at the wheel from another perspective. That's exactly where the rim is touching the braking pad on our left side. And so we want to increase the tension on the spokes on our right side, it's the bicycle's non-drive side, and decrease the tension on perhaps these two spokes. We're gonna see how it goes. It's not a huge one, so we're gonna do it very, very gently. What I'm gonna do right now is to use my tool, and now I'm going to thread the nipple on the spoke, increasing the tension of the spoke, just by, let's say, not more than 90 degrees, maybe 70 or 80 degrees, like this, and see the reaction. Okay, no rubbing here. These are the basic principles of wheel screwing. You know now that when the rim is escaping into one side, you want to increase the tension on the spoke on the other side so that they will just pull the rim into their side, or also decrease the tension on the same side into the rim is escaping. We were working on some small problem. You should also know that while we are working on some area of the rim, the other area can also change its shape. So make sure you always look at the whole wheel, check out the tension of those spokes, and if you need some further help, you can just watch our whole episode about wheel screwing. The derailleurs on our bike have to provide a smooth and nice gear change. If they don't do their job properly, this will be very annoying for us. It will make our ride much more difficult, especially off-road, and also it can cause a chain snap. Let's see first what kind of adjustments are available on most models of the rear derailleurs. The first adjustment we want to make after replacing the derailleur of the cable are the limiting screws. One is for the highest gear and the other one is for the lowest gear. In order to correctly adjust these two, I'm going to release the cable. In this way also, I'll be sure that on the highest gear it will be the limiting screw and not the cable tension that will stop the derailleur. Let's adjust the limiting screw for the highest gear right now. This screw will allow the chain to go to the highest gear but not further, meaning between the frame and the cassette. On some derailleurs it will have the symbol H, which means highest gear. Let's see what happens when I'm threading this one in. As you can see, the cage of the derailleur goes inwards, so to the lower gear. And how should this one be set? It has to allow the derailleur for the easy gear change to the highest gear, but not further. So not further, not between the frame and the cassette. Let's check it out. Seems to be perfect. Many bike mechanics will try to set the upper pulley of the derailleur not in line with the highest gear, but a little bit further, just a little bit. That means that the derailleur will jump from the 11th to the 12th gear easily, but still the chain will not go any further. Now it's time to adjust the low gear limiting screw, so might have the symbol L. The principle is exactly the same and pretty easy. If the derailleur has hard time shifting from the second to the first gear, we will be unthreading this one, so counterclockwise. And if the chain will be able to go in between the cassette and the spokes, we will be threading this one in. Now we're checking out the lowest gear, and as you can see, the derailleur doesn't want to shift into it. Hardly, no, it won't do it. That means we need to unthread this bolt. Normally this adjustment means maybe unthreading by 15 degrees or so, but I've really made it bad so that you see how it works. Okay, it seems to work just fine. So I'm unable to push the chain further, but I have the lowest gear, the first gear, so it's okay. This is how these limiting screws can look like on other derailleurs, like this one, Shimano XTR M9000. In this case, we do have these symbols, H for high and L for low. Here is the 20 years old Shimano DRIVETRAIN XT rear derailleur, and we have same exact two limiting screws with the H and L symbol. Just one additional piece of advice. After you are done with everything, like mounting the cable and adjusting the tension of the cable, you might need to tweak these two just a little bit so that you are really sure that changing the gear to the lowest and to the highest is really smooth, but the chain will not go any further. Now we're going to fasten the cable of the derailleur and adjust its tension. Before we fasten the cable though, it is good to look at our barrel adjusters. Those could be just at the shifter or at the rear derailleur or both. I would set those to the 0 position like this, and then maybe unthread those by 2 turns so that we'll be able to change the cable tension both sides, increasing it and decreasing it. First off, I need to find out how the cable should be fastened, not on this side, but on this side, on this model of the derailleur at least. Then we want to make sure that all the housings are in place. And now I'm just pulling the cable a little bit and fastening the bolt. Now we need to learn how to operate this barrel adjuster, and it's also very easy. When unthreading it, we are increasing the tension on the cable, so the derailleur will be easier going up the cassette from the highest to the lowest gears. And when I'm threading this one in, I'm decreasing the tension of the cable so that the derailleur will be more willing to go down the cassette from the lower to the higher gears. And let's just make one short exercise. We are trying to shift both ways on the cassette. Shifting up the cassette goes very easily, even a bit too fast, and down the cassette, so shifting to the higher gears, doesn't work properly. It doesn't work at all here. What it means? It means that the cable tension is too high and we need to thread the barrel adjuster in. Here is the barrel adjuster situated just by the rear derailleur on the old Shimano DRIVETRAIN XT. Let's see how it worked. Shifting up the cassette, called downshifting because we are going to the lower gears, very smooth. And also silent, we don't hear any clicking noises. Okay, upshifting to the higher gears, very smooth. I'm happy with this. Very, very good. Of course, adjusting the gears on the new drivetrain with the new chain and super clean cables is very easy, but it should be done in different phases. So with each phase, we're gonna turn this barrel adjuster by really maybe 10 or even 5 degrees so that we find the right spot on each gear for the derailleur. And now there is just one little bolt left. Let's see it. We already know these two. These are the limiting screws, the H and L, high gear and lowest gear. But this one here, that's the little screw which will adjust the distance between the upper pulley of the rear derailleur and the cassette. Here is how this little screw is situated on the Shimano XTR M9000 derailleur. And once more, we've got the 20 years old rear derailleur, and there is also this kind of adjustment almost in the exact same place. Let's see how this one works. I am unthreading the bolt. Pay attention to the upper pulley, to the guide pulley. The distance between the guide pulley and the cassette is lower now, okay? Now I'm threading this bolt in, and the upper pulley goes away from the cassette. The question is how to adjust it and what should be the distance between the pulley and the cassette. You should be paying attention to the manual because the different models of the derailleurs will require different distances here. But I would say it also depends a lot on how long cage you have of the derailleur and what's the range of your cassette, how many teeth it has. So my principle here is to check out whether the gear change from the second to the first gear, so to the lowest gear, doesn't feel stiff, and I try to set this distance as small as possible. If it's too small, then you will feel stiff gear change from the second to the first gear, maybe even from the third to the second. But as long as it doesn't feel stiff, it's smooth, I will be trying to keep my upper pulley as close to the cassette as possible, because then the gear change on other sprockets will feel just faster. If you already know how to adjust the rear derailleur, the front one shouldn't be a problem. Here we also have the bolt which is fastening the cable. We've got the barrel adjuster just by the shifter, which you already know. And then we have these two limiting screws for the highest gear and for the lowest gear. First, we are going to look at the cassette. We are now on the lowest gear, both on the crankset and in the rear. I'm going to shift down the cassette maybe 3 or 4 gears, just like that. There is no rubbing between the chain and the front derailleur. Then I'm shifting to the second gear in the front, and then we can operate some gears in the rear just freely. As you can see, my front derailleur cage is exactly in the middle, so that I can shift all those gears with no noise between the chain and the front derailleur. Now we're gonna shift into the highest gear and use the highest gears in the rear. No rubbing, everything just fine. And now we're gonna look at the front derailleur. Now we're looking at our beautiful front mag. Principles all the same. The limiting screws will not allow the chain to come off the crankset, either outwards or in between the frame and the crankset. That would be really damaging for our frame, for our bike, especially the carbon one. And then, if the front derailleur doesn't want to shift from the third to second, from second to first, we need to thread in the bar adjuster so that the tension of the cable will be lowered. And if it doesn't want to go up the crankset from the first to the second, from the second to the third, then we need to increase the tension of the cable bar by unthreading the bar adjuster. Let's just see how it works right now. So I'm going up the cassette now to the lower gears. Now here in the middle, no rubbing here, it works just perfectly. Now you can operate many gears. Actually, we can operate a whole cassette, which is not recommended because of extended use of our chain, but it's possible and it's no problem for the derailleur. And then we are going up the cassette to the lower gears, the lowest gear in the front, and it's all perfect. The capacity of our rear derailleur and front derailleur isn't a complicated matter if we only understand roughly how our drivetrain works. So let's talk about what the capacity is, what happens if the derailleur has either too high or too low capacity, and finally, how can we find out what kind of capacity derailleur we need for our drivetrain. And we're gonna do that in 3 steps for the rear derailleur and in just 1 simple step for the front derailleur. The capacity of the rear derailleur basically tells us what is the distance between these 2 pulleys, or in other words, what is the length of the derailleur's cage. It can be either short, medium or long. And in case of the front derailleur, the capacity is all about shaping of its plates. Now, why do we need different capacities of our derailleurs for different drivetrains? Please look at the cage of the rear derailleur and see what happens while we change the gears. The cage of the derailleur will try to keep the tension on our chain because we don't want our chain to be just like that. It would cause many problems. And while the chain goes through the smaller sprockets, it will travel shorter way, so the cage has to adjust accordingly. And when we shift to those bigger chain rings, like in the front and sprockets in the rear, as you can see, the chain will travel a longer way, so that the cage has to adjust accordingly once more. What would happen if the capacity of our rear derailleur was too low? In this case, that would mean installing short cage rear derailleur instead of long cage, as we can see on this video, and that would mean also having shorter chain. So this is the extreme position, but in that position the cage of the rear derailleur would be extremely tight, and also sometimes the rear derailleur would be able to get stuck on the largest sprocket in the rear. So this cage cannot be too short, so the capacity has to match a whole range of the gears on our drivetrain. What would happen though if the capacity of the rear derailleur was too high? Basically, nothing would happen. We would just have the chain longer than needed and the rear derailleur heavier than needed. It would still be able to put the tension on the chain. So having the capacity of the rear derailleur too low is the problem, is bigger problem than having the capacity too high. In case of the front derailleur, it's all much more simple because the front max capacity has nothing to do with the chain length or tension. It's just all about the shaping of those plates so that the derailleur will be able to, let's say, scoop up as low as possible in case of the double chain rings or triple chain rings on the crankset. And now we're ready to find out what capacity of the derailleurs we need for the drivetrain we just bought for our project. So let's say we've got 3x11 40, 30, 22 teeth chain rings on our crankset. This is the XT1. The first step is to find out the difference in the range of those teeth between the largest and the smallest. So 40 minus 22, that gives us 18. Write it down, 18. In the second step, we need to find out what is the gearing range on our cassette. We've got here the XT1 for single, double and triple chain rings. That's good because we have triple chain rings on the crankset. And the teeth are 11 through 40. So once more, 40 minus 11, that gives us 29. In case of 1x drivetrain, because we've got here the triple chain rings on the crankset, if it was only one, we don't need to even bother about the crankset. We only need then the gearing range on the cassette, so that would be 40 minus 11, and that's 29. In case of the front max capacity, we are only interested in the gearing range of our crankset, in this case 40 minus 22, and that's 18. We are almost done. We need just one more parameter of the rear derailleur, and that's the largest sprocket on the cassette that our rear derailleur will be compatible with. So once we know the capacity, we only need to check out for this largest sprocket on the cassette that our rear mech will work with. So knowing the capacity and this number, we are ready to purchase the right derailleurs for our projects. Removing and installation of the cassette is pretty easy. We need Go in between the rollers or the links, so like that. If it doesn't fall down, that means this chain is still in very good condition. I don't have to replace it, and I'm not wearing down my cassette and the crankset too much. If you get to like this game, we can be even more precise in measuring this. So let's just remove this one. This chain indicator is longer and has two sides. One side will indicate the 0.75% of the extension, and the other side, we're going to use it like this, will indicate 0.5% of the extension. What it means for us is that when the extension of the chain is already 0.5%, that would mean it's good to replace it if we have titanium or alloy sprockets on the bike, because they just wear down more quickly. And if it reaches 0.75%, we should replace it whatever drivetrain we have. Of course, the sprockets on the cassette or freewheel and the crankset will eventually wear down, but if we do replace the chains regularly, the cassette should have a lifetime of many chains. That means many thousands of kilometers. In some emergency cases, let's say we are visiting our friend or the relatives and we are inspecting their bike, we don't have the chain wear indicator with us, we can try to pull the chain away from the chain rings on the crankset and see how much it moves. As you can see, this chain is almost new and it's very difficult to pull it away of the chain rings. If the extension would be, let's say, around 0.7%, you would be able to pull maybe 3 links away, a little bit away from the chain rings, but it's always the best thing to have the chain wear indicator. How to remove from our bike the chain and then properly put it back on? We need to consider 2 situations. Number 1, we've got a chain with a quick link. And number 2, we need to use the tool called chain tool or chain breaker. First off, we need to find out whether there is a quick link on our chain. We can just spin the pedals, searching for the link which will look differently, and that's it, we've got a quick link on our chain. Before removal or installation, some will prefer removing it first from the chain ring on the crankset so that it will be completely loose, no resistance on the chain. In order to break the chain with the quick link or power link, I'm going to squeeze against each other these links which are just next to my quick link. Some quick links can be pretty stiff, so doing such a motion inwards and outwards, but just a little bit, can help. So now I'm squeezing those and moving the chain. You can see the pin moving here. with in the front and the largest one in the rear. Maybe the largest one in the front and the third gear in the rear would be good, because we are never going to use such a combination of gears, so don't worry about that so much if you have a triple crankset. How to remove and assemble the pedals on our bike. This is pretty easy job, but the most common questions here are what tools to use, what kind of thread there is on each side on our bike, and third, what torque should we use when assembling those to the bike, so threading those in. Let's begin. The first question and first answer, the best tool to use here is the 15mm wrench. This one will give us a lot of control over the pedal when both unthreading and threading those in. Some pedals, not this for example, but this is the clipless pedal, will give us also the option of using the Allen key, but still this is compatible with the 15mm wrench, and that's the one I recommend here. How to unthread the pedals and then thread those in. First off, it is good to have a specifically designed tool for that, the wrench, because it will move our hand a little bit outwards so that we will not hurt it against the chain rings, which is not that risky, but sometimes it happens that our hand slips and it could be dangerous. So having such a tool is really good, but you don't have to have it. The second thing is to find the right place to start the unthreading. For example, this one here is not the best, because when I'm pushing, the pedal goes up, so the other way around should be better. So now I will be just pushing down, that's what I'm doing, and it will be the most easy way for us to memorize how to do it will be when threading those in. But when we unthread the pedals, just remember that the wheel turns to the front, so we are not spinning backwards but just forward, and we do it on both sides, so you don't have to memorize drive side, the non-drive side. Now we're gonna thread this one, platform pedal, back to the bike. How to do it? First off, it's good to use some grease, because maybe something anti-seize would be good. I'm replacing the pedals on my bikes like 20 times a season, so I don't even use it that often, maybe once a season. And now we need to find the right place in the thread. Okay, this is the right one, and I'm turning here clockwise, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm just holding to the pedal now and spinning backwards, right? I'm holding to the axle of the pedal, spinning backwards, threading this in. It will be the same, exactly the same on the other side. Now, how much torque should we use? Not too much, definitely less than many beginner cyclists would think. Okay, now it's starting to resist, so I will just give it a little push now, like this. That's enough. Let's go to the other side of the bike. really good job. I have cut around 12.5 centimeters of this housing. Also weight savings.